Hello, this video is an overview of how I process my film negatives. I've been shooting film for the last few years and started scanning it myself when I realized how much more affordable it was, and I thought it would be helpful to go over the step-by-step of how I convert from a negative to a positive. Shooting film can be expensive, so this setup is geared towards the budget-minded. I use a Sony a5000, which is a fairly cheap camera with a large sensor, and to it I attach a macro tube, 7mm. It was only a few dollars online. Photodiox, it's a solid brand, and it's basically just a piece of metal to separate the lens out a little bit farther. For the lens, I use a Yashica 50mm f1.4 that I picked up at a thrift store for about $10. It's plenty sharp for this, especially when you stop it down to f5.6, and also you see attached a affordable adapter, again just a blank piece of metal to get the right flange distance, and I use a blower to clean off the sensor dust. This is a light box that I made with a cigar box and some LED strips and attached it to a cell phone charger with an on-off switch. At some point soon I'd like to upgrade this to be a little bit more uniform in its illumination. Now to begin, we take the camera, clean off any stray dust that may have accumulated on the sensor, attach the macro tube and the lens, lining up the dots. Doesn't always click on immediately because it's a fairly cheap macro tube, but you get what you pay for. It works. Attach the quick release for the tripod, make sure it's good and tight, and you'll notice that I'm right next to my desktop. I like to scan my negatives using the PC remote function on the Sony camera so that I'm going straight into the computer and I don't have to worry about transferring files afterwards. Just convenient. I usually use some nitrile gloves to make sure that I don't get any of my finger oils on my negatives and keep them as spick and span as I can. I get my negatives uncut from the lab. It seems to be the quickest process for me. It comes in protective plastic casing, and I'm just reviewing them before starting the scanning process. I'll remove the plastic casing as I begin to scan. With the macro tubes on, I focus the camera by moving the tripod up and down to get it as close to focus as we can while it's wide open, and then stop down to f5.6. Next, we head over to the computer so that there's no shake when hitting the shutter button. Remote camera control is a program for Sony cameras, and it works pretty simply. You set your settings and take the picture, and that's it for capturing the negatives. Now on to processing. Here are a few raw files that I've already captured and converted into DNGs just for simplicity's sake. I'm using Adobe Camera Raw to edit them, but you can use any editor that will let you use the histogram directly. This shot is Fuji Acros 100 film, one of my favorite black and white films, and we're starting with black and white because the process is basically the same for color, but it's a lot simpler for black and white because you only have to deal with one histogram. So I've cropped it in so that the relevant data in the histogram is only coming from the photograph. You can crop back out later if you want to get that sort of filmic framing or not. That's up to you. Next we go to the histogram and we basically just want to invert it. So we take the top down and the bottom up. And you notice that I have the clipping warnings turned on so you can see where you get actual white whites and black blacks. Just straight away the line looks pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of an S-curve to get it more contrasty, pulling down the bottom piece there, giving it a little bit of a curve. And this is where personal taste comes in and where you can spend hours really tweaking it. I always try to make sure that I have at least a little bit of clipping in the whites and the darks, just a small piece so that I know that I've got a white white and a black black. But again, if you're going for a low contrast look, maybe that's not what you want to do. It'll be different for color for sure. And here I forgot to turn the saturation all the way down. That just gets rid of that little blue cast you were seeing there. And you can mess with the sliders if you want to. They do the opposite of what you think they would, because the file is still a negative on the back end. If you change the blacks, it'll change the whites. If you change the whites, it'll change the blacks. But I prefer to do all of that straight in the histogram. And that's black and white. Going on to color, these are two shots that we'll look at that are Ektar 100. Ektar has been the easiest color film for me to process. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just that it's a little bit more straightforward, or there's less of a cast in the negative itself. But I thought it would be best to start with some easy film to show you the process. And it's basically the same thing. We crop in, we go to the histogram, but instead of editing the full RGB histogram, we do red, green, blue individually, and we do the same thing. We bring the top down, if you can grab it just right, and the bottom up. And it'll look a little funny until you've gone through all three channels. But again, bring it right in line. And you want to do first a rough in with each one, and then we'll go through and tweak. So bring the bottom of the green down and the top all the way up. So it's inverted, and we've brought it right in line with where the data starts and ends. And the blue in the same way. And already you can see what the picture's looking like. I found that the blue channel is usually something I have to tweak a little bit more than the others. And this is where you really start to understand how that RGB plays with, how the colors play with each other. It's a process that you're just going to have to spend some time tweaking. Throwing a little bit of contrast in each of those, a little bit of a curve, but keeping it subtle so that you don't get anything blown out. There's not a magic way to make it all better that I've found. There's not a magic way to make it work for everyone, especially because there are so many variabilities while you're scanning. But it's starting to come into where I really like the way it looks. I think we probably can call that good. Let's just go back out to the sliders. And again, you could do some adjustments here if you wanted to darken or lighten it up. And it's going the opposite way you would think it would. Sometimes it's easier to get the initial piece done in the histogram and then just do some really small adjustments with the sliders. But that's up to you. Zooming in here, you can see, I think it looks pretty good. Not the most amazing photo ever, but it's very colorful, so I thought it would be a good example. And our reds look red, our purples look purple, our greens look green. I'm not an expert. This is just how I do it. One of the other things you can do is once you get something you like, you can save it as a setting in Camera Raw if that's what you're using, or in Lightroom. I think it's the same process or just slightly different. And once you have it saved as a preset, you can apply it to all your other photos that you've taken of that film. You're still going to have to come in and tweak each one, but let's take a look at how we apply it. This is another Ektar 100 shot that I took, I believe, on the same roll, again with the Nikon FM10 50mm. So you can just go straight to the preset and apply it. You notice that the shot's a little darker, and the settings might have been a little bit different when I was scanning it. So we're going to have to tweak what we've already done, but the bulk of it's there for us. So crop and go back in and take a look at the histograms. We need to move them out a little to capture a little bit more of that data that's in this scan. And you don't have to apply a preset. I found that sometimes it's helpful, especially when you're going through a large bunch of them. But you notice these histograms are in different places than the last one. And again, I'm not an expert at this. If there's a reason that mine are coming out differently per shot, then let me know in the comments. I'd love to get better at this. I think this shot too was maybe a little bit underexposed. It was a dark room with those bright fluorescent lights, so not my best photograph, but it is pretty colorful, so I thought I'd give it a try for this example. And again, the tweaking here, you can spend a lot of time going through each photo and editing it. It's the blessing and the curse of this process. But that looks good enough for this picture. One of the things I love about processing the negatives myself is that I get so much more flexibility when I get the raw file out of my camera and I get that full 20 megapixel scan. So I hope that overview is useful to some of you. If there's any ways that you think I could be doing this better, please let me know in the comments. I'm always looking to improve, and I'll be making more videos about film photography and other projects that I'm working on. So subscribe and stay tuned. Thanks.